Hi again and welcome to the second part of the first session of the Geodict workshop at Image-Based Simulation for Industry 2022. To get us all on the same page, I'm actually going to load the segmented data from the prepared data sets on the hard drive so that we don't rely on you having done all the operations exactly the same way that I had done them in the first section. So to get to those data, I go to the File menu and load a structure file. I go to Open Structure, select the path out of user data into the building statistical twin data, and there the NMC cathode is actually segmented into structure 42137. And I load that structure and I'm back to the original color settings here. Yours are probably still black and white because I started Geodict again. So the next step is to actually get all of us to have the same visualization settings, and to get the ones as they are listed in the tutorial as well in the PDF document that you see there, we're going to execute a macro, a script that has all the settings in it that will get us again all on the same page. So to run that script, I go in the macro section in here and select execute macro script, and I have to browse to the location where the script is located. Again, I have to go up from user data down into building the statistical twin and find the set colors Python script inside that folder. I open the folder, and actually I'll show you how scripting works in Geodict by hitting the edit button in here, and here is where having Notepad++ installed is already very helpful. If you don't have Notepad++ installed, it won't look as pretty probably, but you should get the same information with any of your favorite editors. In Notepad++, there's a nice function of actually closing all the individual blocks because it knows about the Python syntax, and I have applied Alt-0 to show you the structure of the actual file. There is a header section in it that says this was actually already recorded for the previous release of Geodict. There's a short description. It is a macro file for Geodict 2020 for one of our tutorials that gets us all on the same page regarding visualization. And then the main block is actually the set view status arguments that have a lot of information in them. If I unfold the various pieces of blocks in here, you can see that there's 2D and 3D settings. So actually, as we can see, 368 lines total of instructions on how to visualize various things inside Geodict. So having selected that and having looked at a file, I can say run that macro and close the pop-up window up here again, and now I get a 3D visualization of the structure that should be very, very similar to the one that we constructed in the first session, and all of us should have the same visualization on the screen again at the beginning of this second section. Actually, I just realized I forgot something really important about macro execution a moment ago, and so I'll go back to the macro file, the macro section up here, execute macro script. The setting the colors Python script is still set, so I can hit the edit button right here and I'm back in the Notepad++ window. And what I forgot to say, that beyond the header, description and set view status, the most important thing is the thing that does everything is the run command. So this is the way that we're extending Python. We have a lot of arguments of things that we're telling to Geodict that are defined in this large block up here. And then we need to tell it to actually use all that. And so there's something called a command for Geodict, which is called set view status. And we're calling this command with the syntax, and we're giving it all the arguments that were defined in the previous section. And of course, there's a lot more about macros and automating Geodict in this fashion, where you can have a sequence of such commands, and all of the Python's powerful scripting language in the last session on Tuesday afternoon. So I'll go back to Geodict now and close that window again. Next, we're going to analyze the grains in this structure. And to do that, I have to switch to a different module. Up here under Analyze, there is a module called Grain Find. And in it, there is several options: identifying binder, identifying grains, estimating grain diameters. We're actually going to identify the individual grains and look for the options of that command. And we have found that the minimal grain diameter for this particular data set is better 4 than the default of 2, and the interface threshold is better 16 instead of 14. Actually, all the other settings can stay on the defaults, the input options and constituent materials, for example. So I'm going to hit run, and because I ran it before, I have to overwrite results, which you probably don't have to do. And now we can watch how Geodict actually runs through a sequence of algorithms. We see watershed is being executed here right now, for example, to identify the individual grains, and then later we will also see the statistics of these individual grains. Again, we chose a data set small enough so that this analysis doesn't take too long and can be done in real time and during this workshop. The estimation is actually a little bit longer than what is the truth here. It's already done with the analysis, and I will go to full screen mode and explain the results in a moment. Let's look at the details of the grain identification. Actually, after most operations, Geodict saves a file to your hard drive, and in this case it is called a Geodict result file or a GDR file, and we can see here in the user data folder there is identifygrains.gdr. The actual technical results include, for example, that there were 2,837 grains found, there were 5,601 grain contacts. The individual grains can be loaded from a file that we will go through in a moment, and there are various statistics available right here. For example, there were 53% of solid inside the volume. After the watershed and some grain reconnection, still 53% were available, but then boundary grain removal, because cuts at the grains at the boundary are cut and don't give good statistics. After boundary grain removal, there were only 35% of the volume still covered, and we will see that visualized in a moment. The volume of the identified grains range between 5 micron and about 45,000 cubic microns. There's a mean value given, a standard deviation given, etc. There's deviation from sphere shape by the Krumbine norm, and so on and so on. So pulling down, one see that there's also the statistics on the coordination number and the some value on the grain orientation, for example. So I'll actually go to the grain visualization and show you where all these numbers come from. So in here I can load a 32-bit file that has labels of the individual grains, and I will ask it to actually load that. And the structure is set to visible, might intersect the object indices. I'll set it to invisible, and will show you the result in 3D right now. Actually, the structure is also in memory, and I can switch it back on, and here we see the structure, and now the meaning of boundary grains becomes clear. All those gray grains that are intersecting the boundary have been detected and have been taken out of the statistic in this case. You can choose to leave them in there as well, but in this case they were taken out. So I will remove the structure again and show you just the grains that went actually into the analysis. So those were about 35% of the volume, whereas the complete structure had about 52% of the volume. So I'm going to go back to the result viewer here and switch back to the results, and inside the results I will now look at some plots. So there's many plots possible in here. There's not the time to go into all of them right now. Instead, I want to show you the capability of actually saving such a plot to file. So let's call that demo, for example, and we will just use the current resolution and save that to the user data folder. Or another option is actually to export an animation. So I can go to create videos right here. And actually before I do that, I will want to go back to the standard color scheme, because I know the video assumes that the standard colors are present. So I'll go back to the color settings here and I'll load the default color settings and close that. And if I turn off the volume field, we'll see that that's the original structure now in red again. And I go back to the result viewer and actually create the video. Sorry, first I need to set the parameters. So I have selected just 2 grains instead of all of them, because the video would be way too long, and the video duration is 2 seconds to keep everything in the time frame of this actual workshop. So I'll tell it to create the video, and yeah, there's some information about that, so I'll get that started. That video has to create a number of, contains a number of frames, and then those frames are placed into a single animation at the end. And while this is running, I can show you already the results of the saving the scatter plot earlier. So here's the PNG image that we looked at before. And let's see how far the exporting the video is working now. So it has created the individual frames, and now the video is being exported into an animation. And the video can be found in that same folder where we were before. I go back to the user data here, and then I look into the identify grains, and in there's a video, and we can have a look at that. So there are only 2 grains shown, and I will go back to the first one, and then somewhere in between it jumps, and if we were to visualize all of them, we would actually see all the individual shapes. And what is being done in here, on the right we see the location of the individual grain in the whole data set. On the left there is a zoom on the details, and then there is the actual grain voxels shown in green, and the fitted object, in this case is almost a sphere, in red. And we see down here in this plot also the position in this overall combined sphericity. So this particular object is a bit far from the main set of objects, and for each and every one of the grains we see its identifier, its volume, its equivalent diameter in microns, and its sphericity actually. So I'll close the video right here, go back to Geodict and show you one more thing that could be interesting to you. You may want to analyze the data also with Excel, and so at this point you might be interested in exporting to Excel, and we'll do that in the next section of the video actually. So exporting to Excel, I'll show you a feature that is common to many of the modules and the dialogues in Geodict, And that is, there is this counter down here that if you don't answer this pop-up window, then the default will actually be executed, which is happening right now. So I didn't say yes or no, but Geodict is actually exporting to Excel right now with the default option there. This helps when you run scripts that will run for a long time, and sometimes Geodict will ask you for some input, and if then you're not in front of your computer, that would waste a lot of time waiting for your input, and Geodict will just continue for you. And actually at this point it has finished with the export, and unfortunately Excel opened on another screen and I have to pull it over here, but here you see that actually a lot of the data, or all of the data that were previously available in Geodict are now also available in Excel actually for you. So I'll close Excel, I won't save this, and I will continue. So we'll continue with another analysis. We will analyze the chord lengths of the granular structure here. So I go back to the main Geodict GUI here, and I see, whoops, the animation has left behind a different data in memory than I was before, than I was used to. You can see the triangulation, which is not a voxelized data, but actually an analytic representation of an ellipsoid here that I can turn on and off, and that was seen in the movie before. And you can also see the structure that is the voxelized version, and then there is with a lot of transparency also the volume field visualizing the neighboring grains just very faintly. But actually I want to go back to the original structure, and so I could load it again from the disk, but always in Geodict, in the GDR window, you can always go back to the original structure as well by loading whatever went into the operation. And here I just did that and tell Geodict that yes, I want to be able to see the original structure again. So now here we're back at the 500 by 500 by 200 voxels, and I will go into the chord length distribution right now. So that's inside the Analyze Porodict module. Actually, in the Geodict 2021 beta, the chord length distribution is not in the Porodict module anymore. It has moved to the Matic module, and ultimately will be available in both modules in the final release. But for the purposes of this workshop, I have to move to the Matic module right here. And this is different from the written PDF with the example that you have received with the delivered data, and choose the material characterization and chord length distribution from these two pull-down menus right here. I'll edit the options, and I find that we will analyze the pores rather than the solids in this case. Analyzing the solids or grains makes a lot of sense as well, but we're looking for the pores right now. And we will go through the X, Y, and Z direction. We could also look at 2D and 3D diagonals and compare the statistical digital twin with the original data sets later, also for those properties. But it would be way too many curves for the comparisons later. So I hit OK and run the analysis. I have done it before, so I need to overwrite the previous result, which you won't have to because you're running it the first time. And in here I get very quick result. The chord lengths of the pores in the X and Y direction, the mean chord length is actually to the third digit, only differs in the third digit by 0.03 actually microns. Whereas in the Z direction, the pores seem to be a little bit shorter. But let me point out to you that our domain is also shorter in the Z direction, and so the short pores that you get for as boundary artifacts have a larger influence, contribute more to the overall mean chord length. So this doesn't mean that it's an anisotropic material. Without further analysis, at least one should further investigate that this difference in here. And of course, one can also plot the results, and we can see the clear difference between the X and Y, not only in the largest lengths that occur, which is There's about 120 microns over here for the X and Y direction maybe, but also in the number of shorter chords that occur in the Z curve, the top curve over here, that makes the Z curve look quite different from the other two directions. So now we go back and create a statistical digital twin of this structure. I'll look for 2021 down here and pick the grain geo create grains option. I go into the options menu here and I enter into the result file name statistical digital twin, and I'm going to use the results from the grain find operation. So we're going to look here for identify grains. This is a GDR file from the previous run, from one of the previous operations here, and I'll open that, and then all these values here change to values that were found earlier with the grain identification algorithm. We happen to know from having run this example before that grain find doesn't perfectly find all the options yet, and we need to make a few modifications. But for example, there is a object size distribution inside the grain geo module in here that was actually fitted from the grain find operation, and you can see that such a distribution count probability of different diameters in the X, Y, and Z direction of various ellipsoids that are being generated is prohibitive to be entered manually. So the automatic finding of the parameters is really helpful here. I will change the object solid volume percentage to 50 because we happen to know that there is additional binder in the structure, and to make the structure look even more similar to the real one, we're going to generate slightly fewer particles, grains, than were identified by grain find for a bigger similarity with the real material. And we're going to inside the remove overlap options change the solid volume percentage down to 0.15 overlap, and click OK right here, and we're going to set the random seed to 46 for similarity. So then with the same random seed, structures will always look the same, and you and I, we will all get the same answer if we got the same grain identification before. So then I hit OK, and I click generate, and as I ran it before, I have to overwrite my previous result. And we can now follow the operations of grain geo here, and I can explain a little bit of what is going on. So the difficulty here is to get high packing densities of granular material. It's easy when the grains are allowed to overlap, and our algorithms will initially do that. But in nature, grains actually don't overlap, and we need to create them just touching but not overlapping. And the way the algorithm works, it creates a overlapping version of the grains at first, and then it wiggles them around and moves them around, trying to remove that particular overlap. And what we're seeing here is there's going to be a number of steps taken where we are reducing the overlap in the objects right here. We have asked that value to come down to 0.15, so that's very low, and we're actually not ready to wait for all that. And instead, I'm going to not cancel this structure generation, but stop it. And the difference is that when I stop Geodict will actually create a result file, and I will live with the fact that we haven't gotten the perfect overlap removal, but we still have more overlap than I had originally requested. Yeah, if I were to run this in a project, I would not stop this operation. I would let it finish. But now I'm stopping it, and it tells me yes, Geodict will be interrupted, and Geodict will produce a result file. So here we are. The remaining overlap is still 4%, nowhere near the value I had requested, but there is no time to wait for that right now. And actually there's one little thing to see up here. There's a number of previous results from GrainFind statistical twin generation that I could access by looking at the individual values up here. But right now I'm interested in the generated structure. It looks very similar to the one we had looked at before. Maybe you can see the slightly higher porosity and the slightly more openness in the structure here compared to the original one. So as mentioned, we should actually add binder to the structure as well. And so from create grains, we're going to move into the add binder option inside the GrainGeo module, and in there's also a few things to set. So the result file name should now be statistical twin with binder, and the added solid volume percentage, that's about the 3% that we were missing that I took out from the GrainGeo structure generation. And the binder is going to show up in a different material so that you can actually identify it visually. The contact angle is changed to 10. Tolerance 0.05 stays at the value where it is at, and we're not going to layer the binder, which in real electrodes can actually also happen by the way they are manufactured. There's going to be just a homogeneous distribution of binder. And I say OK and generate this structure. Again, I need to overwrite because I have done it before. And now Geodict is placing binder basically around the regions where the spheres touch is where binder will also happen to occur in nature. Should be done any minute now. And yes, also the volume percentage of binder that I had requested, 3%, was not possible. The accuracy I had asked for is not reached. The actual volume percentage is 3.3 rather than 3. So now I go to the visualization here, and we can nicely see the green binder distributed throughout the red original grains. Let's look at it also in 2D, where we can have a look at all the different cross sections here, and I can see that actually we have added 3.5% binder, and there were actually only 43.5% grains originally here. Okay, that's the end of session 2, and we will compare the real material with a statistical digital twin in the third session after this.